This must be where the Bloodstone was sundered. This is a holy place, overwhelmed by the corruption of the dragons. Clear this, and let me read the Elder Runes.
Today, we're talking lore. Today, we've got a bit of a long one, and honestly, there is more to speculate on the topics I'm about to go through with you guys than maybe even the main release. So, I'm going to be focusing on one of the most awesome current event update ArenaNet have done so far by a long way that really has opened up the options for where the story might be going. I'm going to be talking about the Burden of Choice achievement quest line that was put in with one of the most recent patches. This is the next video in my series covering all the different stuff that's been going on with current events. If you've missed the previous installments of this series, you can click the screen right now to be taken to previous episodes. So before we get into the quest itself, before we get into what has actually happened, I'm going to need to give you guys a little bit of background on where Guild Wars 2 has been and where it seems to be going, and who some of these characters even are. So very quickly, a couple of important points to establish. Number one, the Consortium were established after Guild Wars 2's release as a morally grey organisation of cutthroat merchants that were established by the Asura.
Consortium is neither good nor evil. The Consortium is capitalist. The Consortium is concerned primarily with its bottom line. We see the Consortium's products. We see the Consortium's employees. We don't see the Consortium's decision makers, so we don't know what their secret agenda is.
These guys were not in any of the pre-release lore for Guild Wars 2. They were not present in any of the launch content for Guild Wars 2. They were only introduced as a result of some of the earliest Living World updates or streaming updates that went into the game, before it was even really known as Living World. The Consortium aren't necessarily good guys, but they always manage to keep themselves on the right side of the law. Some examples of things that they've done that really doesn't look too good is selling people essentially into slave labor and work camps at South Sun. They were responsible for the cargo attacks on Lion's Arch, whether they intended to be or not. They sent a hit out on one of their own members for stepping out of line. And most importantly for today's video, back in July of this year, and this is something I've not talked about on the channel yet, ArenaNet randomly dropped a new Consortium NPC, a tradesman, into the game who was offering a new magical panacea to people: refined crate oil. If you indulged in this tradesman's offer, you could get the first bottle of this crate oil for free, and then you'd have to pay for later ones from him. But this consumable, you'd get in the inventory, you'd double click it, all it would ever do is just put a debuff on you, poison you, and nothing positive whatsoever. It seemed like really it was something small ArenaNet had put into Lion's Arch as a joke, right? This is a reference to someone being a snake oil salesman, and it's very in line with what the Consortium kind of do. And it might have looked like that was that. But there was actually something very interesting about this NPC. It was actually demonstrating some new tech, a new system that I believe we haven't seen in Guild Wars 2 so far, and actually could be the foundation of a lot of more interesting things for current events to come. So what do I mean by this? Well, through this NPC, with his dialogue, players could either indulge him and buy his stuff and be nice, or you had ample opportunities to refuse buying the oil. You could be a douchebag to him, and you could trash his stuff. If you did any of the latter of those options, which you might feel rightly justified to, you wouldn't be able to get him out of Lion's Arch. He'd still be there selling the stuff, but he'd actually hike the prices for you. So if you did that, if you were mean to him and then you went and tried to buy more crate oil, he'd start charging you more and more and more. What we were looking at in this little tradesman that was dropped in was dynamically shifting vendor wares based on different choices and dialogues that you had gone with. Further, players who missed the original introduction of this character to Lion's Arch when he first came in, and then only got to speaking to him a little bit later, like me, we could buy his stuff, but he'd charge us a little bit more too. So if you were one of the first people to find him and you were nice to him, you could have really, really low prices. I think he sells it to you for just 1 silver, 25 copper, for basically nothing. But if you were a douchebag, if you were late to the game, he can go as high as 5 gold selling you each one. So this is really interesting. This isn't something we've seen Guild Wars 2 do before. It was nothing too formal, and it's just kind of been a useless feature I felt was demonstrating something new and interesting they were doing. Well, in the more recent current events, they seem to have taken that system and pushed it a lot further. Also, to continue with our recap here, still with the Consortium, you'll remember that in many of the more recent current events, they've had quite an active role. They seem to be interested in the leyline magic, which is currently exploding all over Tyria. The weird events that are happening, their researchers are combating the Inquest, they're trying to study the areas of unstable magic, recover samples, monitor the Bloodstone-crazed creatures, and so forth. The Consortium have sat up and taken an interest. They are playing a pretty active role in the story right now, for the first time since some of the early days back in 2012, 2013. The second little bit of background I need to give you as well is on these anomalies which have recently been appearing. So back in 2013, we had an update called Fractured, in which Ellen Keel made good on her promise that if she was elected, she would create a fractal studying the Forma Nova reactor explosion. Can you guys believe that? 2013. This is 3 years ago. And that's weird to me because I still remember waiting for that for what felt like an eternity, and I remember making the videos on that content as clear as day. Anyway, in the Fractured release came some pretty interesting reveals about Scarlet as our enemy, and the content dealt with the plant as it dabbled in high concentrations of leyline energy before exploding like a nuclear power plant. The fallout of that explosion still affects Metrica Province to this day, and new Asura characters will immediately start hearing about that. The explosion itself isn't necessarily what we're so interested in. We're interested in the final boss. See, this fractal, this moment in 2013, was the first time in the history of the Guild Wars franchise we had interacted with an anomaly. So this was a strange, magical entity that came from nowhere, was a huge mystery as to its purpose, and we just had to defeat it. It had 3 eyes, it seemed vaguely humanoid. Was it related to some of the other races we've interacted with in the past? People generally didn't know. The devs were asked about it in quite a few interviews, but we never really had anything more from them other than the standard, oh yeah, you're seeing us set up lots of story threads which will get paid off later. And that was kind of that. Much later than that, in 2015, when Lion's Arch was redesigned, an Easter egg went into the game in the form of another new anomaly. So this was the first time the anomaly kind of reintroduced to the story. Now, I can't show you footage of this, unfortunately, because Halloween is currently live. But see, in the new Lion's Arch, if you walk close enough to the Mystic Forge, which you can now dive headfirst into it, you could go into its magic. Now, if you go too deep, it will petrify you and it will throw you out. And that's what most players are familiar with. That's not the Easter egg. However, if you stand just at the right place, at the very edge of that magic in the forge, just grazing against it, you'll transform into an anomaly. So this seemed like a fun Easter egg and a little throwback to whatever this mystery was that they'd set up in the Fractured release, but again, little more. With Heart of Thorns, though, the story goes further. We got the first raid, we got the Forsaken Thicket, and the first area of the Forsaken Thicket, the Spirit Vale, was a haunted area of the Maguma jungle that had recently been subjected to a magical storm of some sort as a result from Morgemoth's death wail. And serving as guardians of the Spirit Vale, the first encounter were once again anomalies. When Living World Season 3 released very recently, we got access to a new fractal, the Chaos Fractal. And in the Chaos Fractal, we see madness descending upon the mists, as it would seem. We're seeing high concentrations of magic there, and again, we see an anomaly. With the start of Living World Season 3 also came a Bloodstone explosion at Bloodstone Fen, resulting in 2 final bits of background you need to remember. Number 1 is that there was a giant anomaly called the Unbound Guardian. Why are all of these things guardians, by the way? Guarding what? One became unhinged in the Cavern of Unseen Lights, which was the leyline tunnel beneath the Bloodstone. And secondly, a new series of current events kicked off where players could find these huge anomalies rampaging around Tyria. I've talked about this again before in previous video in the series if you want to click the link on screen. Defeating one of those big anomalies resulted in the player character seeing visions of small ones, sad anomalies all over Tyria. They would look depressed before disappearing. They were client side, so you'd only see it on your end, giving this impression that when you say to your friends, oh my god, did you see that? And they didn't, that maybe you and your character are going mad. Cue the burden of choice.
The Seers were a magical race, and once close allies to the Missat. When the Elder Dragons first awoke, they gathered the unspoiled magic in the world and locked it within a great artifact, the first Bloodstone. The human gods recovered this bloodstone and gave magic to the human race. When humanity could not handle that power, they split it into 5 parts. The first bloodstone was broken into pieces in Ra. I've modified an Asuran device to follow divine energies. I think we can find shards from that event, and perhaps its location.
Alright, so we come to this current event. This is only part, by the way, there is another chunk which I'll be talking about in another video because we won't have time today. This, to me, though, is hands down the closest thing we've ever had to a traditional quest of sorts in Guild Wars 2 that isn't constrained by heavy instancing, big amounts of enemy scripting and intense gameplay that takes a lot of development time, voice acting again, which takes a lot of development time, and everything else that you would expect with a personal story step or a main living world step that kind of slows the whole process. Make no mistake, this does have its problems. It's not particularly easy to find. It's not repeatable on any characters or in any respect. This could be a strength of it, though. I'll get to that later. It might be removed eventually. It's quite forgettable for these reasons. There's little documenting what you really experienced in game. In fact, I noticed even producing this video that people don't have the explicit dialogue information up on the wiki. This is the kind of thing I feel like will evaporate in like 3 years and no one will remember what the hell was going on. And lastly, I guess it has no real great reward associated with it unless you're into the story and the lore. But hear me out, because this is really awesome. Okay, so as of this patch, if you manage to find one of these anomalies, these visions you've been having, and you actually run into it, something new will happen. It will react to you, it will evaporate, and you'll trigger a new achievement that was previously hidden and now no longer is. To complete this achievement, it's kind of functioning as your quest, okay? You have many sub-goals. Think about, for example, when you have to capture all the Karka in Lion's Arch, and you've got lots of different sub-goals showing where each Karka is. But it's a similar concept here, except that you can only do the sub-goals in a specific order, and you can think of it then as a list that you're going down, each one being its own individual quest objective. So after triggering this, you'll be directed immediately to something very cool. Ogden Stonehealer. Yep, that's right, the Ogden. The same Ogden that we spoke to in Living World Season 2, the same Ogden from the Dermid Priory, the same one from Ra, the same one even that the main Rising Flames patch, which just came out and coincides with this current events release, mentioned. In that patch, we met another dwarf who talked a little bit about Ogden, and we actually get to go talk to him. Now, just so you understand my mind frame, at this point in this quest, the cynic in me was screaming out. I was half convinced that all we were going to do would be walk over to Ogden in the Dermid Priory, hit F on him, and then it would ding achievement progress and we'd move on. Just like the legendary collections have been handling things. But no, we actually do go to Ogden and speak to him about contemporary events. So first, to get to him, you'll be going back to the Priory, you go back to the proper areas, you get to see Gix again, you get to open the doors. I actually believe the office you find Ogden in is a place that for years in Guild Wars 2 you couldn't easily get into that room. They kept the door shut with Ogden behind it, I think because of spoilers. Perhaps this depends on the order. So already it's kind of cool, you're going to a new-ish place. But you get to have this full conversation with him. Now before I comment on what the contents of that conversation, let's just hear it out. So we open up and Ogden says to us, "Oh, you look concerned, what did you do?" And he's already incredulous, which is very nice of him. We say, "Ogden, I need help. I'm seeing visions of a ley line anomaly." And he says, "Just because I'm old doesn't mean I know how to solve all of your problems, child." And we say, "Ogden, please, you must know something." And he says, "Well, I know that you encountered an incredibly high concentration of magic, and it's incredibly likely that there are unforeseen consequences." We ask, "Do you think that this has ever happened in the past?" And he says, "Perhaps. Do you remember the Seers?" And we say, "Yeah, they fought the Elder Dragons when the dragons were previously awake." And he says, "Exactly. They also created the Bloodstone to protect the remaining magic from being consumed by the dragons. That was a key component to how they survived." And we say, "So they must have dealt with high concentrations of magic then?" And he says, "It's possible, but I'm hardly an expert on the Seers. Luckily for you, Trenton Hainsworth is. He was trained as a novice by Randall Greyston. He's in the library across the hall." And we say, "Thanks, Ogden." So at first glance, this conversation might not look like it's got very much going on, but it seriously does. I mean, yes, it's obviously a quick recap for players who have forgot who the Seers are. I would think most people watching me and this channel, we kind of know, you know, the Seers were the guys that did the Bloodstone and so forth. But maybe some people need a bit of a refresher, but there's a lot more we can take away from this if you pay attention. Number one, I do think it's a little bit unfortunate we never got to speak to him about Rockface or any of the other Living World events, or ask him questions about some of the unresolved stuff from Season 2, but hey, it's the current events team, they can only do so much. I'm more than willing to put that to side from now. But so let's have a look. First, his comment that he's so old, he can't help with everything. That's kind of interesting to me. On the one hand, yeah, he's only 250 years old. For a lot of Guild Wars 2 players, you might think that like Lazarus and Ogden, particularly Ogden, maybe Lazarus is incredibly old, but you might think these characters have all this ridiculously deep understanding of the previous Elder Dragon Rising, but there is a big gap between the birth of Ogden Stonehealer and the actual rise of the Elder Dragons. Yes, he is one of a race who had survived that and probably knows of many legends and tales, but he probably firsthand doesn't have any real experience of the Seers, so I get why ArenaNet put that in there. On the other hand, I've mentioned several times in the past that Ogden does know so much that you have to write him very carefully, and I wonder if this is sort of the devs trying to play down his role in that position as being incredibly knowledgeable. Anyway, the Seers. Let's talk about the Seers. Holy crap, they've actually introduced them back to the plot. Despite our visit to Bloodstone Fen recently, and the reintroduction of, say, the Messart to the plot, the Messart being the mortal enemies of the Seers, this here in this quest is the most explicit reintroduction of the Seers that we've had in the story. Now, I've explained before my excitement about the Seers. You know, we've spent so many years looking for the Messart to come back in, and now they have, and I'm like a kid that wants more candy. I'm like, oh, now that we've got the Messart, let's bring the Seers back too, and I'm very excited to see now that we suddenly have this 2016 new event going that's explicitly talking about them, and that we're going to learn more about them. In Guild Wars 1, there was perhaps one or maybe more Seers on the Fire Island chain, as well as on the Shiver Peaks. There were even creatures that the Seers hunted and extracted essence from in the Shiver Peaks. And both of these places, the Fire Island chain, the Southern Shiver Peaks, are likely big locations for this season of the Living Worlds. So the fact that they're introducing the Seers here in this little current event actually isn't too surprising to me. We might be getting a lot more, and I'm pumped for that. Alright, next as well is this kind of suggestion that we're hunting for someone who might have been affected by this in the past. That's very interesting to me that that's what's on our mind. Who has been affected by this before? There are about a billion different characters we could talk about this potentially being a thing, but I guess as a broad catch-all statement, I would say it's quite interesting to think then what chance there is for Guild Wars 1 characters, maybe in their later years, to become relevant again. I'm kind of half joking when I say this, but Avinia? Is this a chance for Avinia? Okay, alright, I won't get my hopes up. And number 5, and most importantly, Ogden just mentioned Randall Greystone. Randall Greystone. Do not just take that as a minor name drop. That could be very significant. So, if you guys remember Aurora Explorable, and clearly the current writers of the current events and contemporary storylines remember it, if you remember Aurora Explorable, where Ogden also was, by the way, the Priory had sent out experts on each of the old races of the world, including the dwarves, by the way, and there was this weird suggestion of a mysterious Path 5 for Aurora that got cut. But they sent out these experts to explore the abandoned city and see what they could learn. Randall Greystone was the expert on the Seers, so it's obvious that he's being referenced here. But what actually happened on his path? Well, he was the NPC of Path 4. Path 4 already is quite special in my opinion. It is arguably, or was arguably, the longest and the most grueling experience of vanilla Guild Wars 2. It was designed to be the hardest and longest and toughest of all of the paths of the final dungeon that itself was supposed to be the hardest and last and so forth. It was meant to be that way. Randall as a character, for example, and I believe this is no coincidence, is actually visually based on our current game director, Mike O'Brien. And of all of the Aurora explorable NPCs, Randall Greystone probably had the most peculiar or exciting thing happen to him of all. And this is actually some of the more established mysteries that maybe we're finally getting an answer to. So in his pursuit of knowledge on the Seers and their interactions with the Bloodstones, Randall Greystone takes you through Aurora Path 4, whereby you keep encountering corrupted priests and priestesses of the human gods that once lived in Aurora. They've now been warped by Zaitan, and each god is guarding a bloodstone shard as Randall is following their trail and what the Seers perhaps had left around, or the gods had left around when they themselves were meddling with the bloodstone. Every single one of the gods is represented except for a priest of Abaddon or Cormyr, and presumably this is because of the state of those gods and how Arar viewed them, the people of Arar viewed them at the time. But every single one of these guys was by a Bloodstone shard. The path itself isn't exactly clear why these high-ranking minions of Zhaitan, even after Zhaitan was defeated, were hanging around Bloodstone shards, but presumably the idea is that these minions were seeking the magic within them. That would be my suggestion, but again, they haven't been clear about oh so many things in Path 4. Deep in the city, at the end of the path, at last, Randall comes to the very location that the gods broke that bloodstone into its 5 distinct pieces all that time ago. Here, he finds one final shard. This final shard, for some reason, doesn't have a god hanging around it. It isn't corrupted, it seems, and he wonders why. Randall finds out that the gods hadn't just broken the Bloodstones, but they had also empowered them, that they had siphoned magic from the area, from the sleeping Zhaitan below them, and they siphoned it into the stone before they broke it. This means that elements of Zhaitan's magic, by the way, would have been infused in the Bloodstone shard that eventually ended up in the Maguma jungle. Randall speculates that the gods probably didn't know that they were taking magic from Zhaitan and putting it in the Bloodstone, but I'm not sure whether they really didn't know. Perhaps that's an unreliable narrator there. At this point, the path basically ends, okay? He reads from the runes in the area, and he triggers a pretty nuts event. Greystone, like, ascends. He disappears. He goes to the mists. The last thing we hear him saying is this. He says, "I can hear the stones calling me." He says, "I can hear the voices of the 6 gods." Then there's a bit where you're fighting the Bloodstone and you hear him whimpering and you hear him screaming. And then at the very end, at the very last, he says, "I go now to seek out the gods themselves." And he's gone. Just like that. So we never had our answers to that. And I've been kind of cynical of when they'd ever get round to answering that. And yet here we are. They've just mentioned Randall, only in passing. But somehow, you'll notice they managed to twist the idea of a path about the Seers into also being a path about the gods. And what's the association here with the current storylines we're doing right now? What does this have to do with the anomalies? Well, I guess we will have to see. So, as per Ogden's instructions, let's move on from Randall. We head to Randall's protege, the person that Randall once upon a time tutored. Another man who knows a lot about the Seers. And we don't really get anything more of Randall after that, guys. It's just a bit of a side to make your eyes wide like mine were. And we talk to him about it. How can we stop seeing these anomalies? He says, "Hello, Commander. Can I help with something?" We say, "What problems did the Seers encounter with high concentrations of magic?" And he explains that even when the Seers created the Bloodstone, he doesn't think it's very likely that they ever dealt with leyline energy on the levels that we are seeing today. He says that the purpose of creating the Bloodstone was to scrape together the tiny bit of energy that was left in the world when the dragons had consumed most of it. Still focusing what must have been left must have been dangerous. And he says there is an artifact we've uncovered that, I believe, may even predate the Bloodstone. The Bloodstone was likely a culmination of a method that they had to store magic. This artifact seems to basically be a small Bloodstone that they used to amplify their own magical abilities in order to create the larger stone. We call it a Shadowstone. And we say, wow, well, how would this help us? And he explains that encountering a high concentration of magic might have infected us with a dangerous overflow of it. If I'm right about this artifact, he says, you may be able to contain the excess magic within the Shadowstone. And we say, do you think that the artifact could be restored? And he says, I think, coincidentally, enough pieces of the shattered Bloodstone could be used to restore the Shadowstone. And we say, this sounds like it could be dangerous. Is this dangerous? And he says, there is certainly some risk, but I think there is an equal, if not greater risk to leaving you in this condition. And we say, fair point, what do I need to do? He says, we've heard reports of bloodstone slivers falling from the sky. If you were to collect 4 good ones, we should be able to restore the artifact. And so this is where the quest itself begins. But listen to that. This is pretty new, guys. We've never heard of something like a Shadowstone, okay? This is a totally new artifact. Remember, the Seers were living in a world with almost no magic left because the Elder Dragons had already consumed it all. They were just trying to get whatever scraps they could to preserve it in any way they could. How did they gather and store it all? The idea was this, the Shadowstone, a very small artifact that amplifies the Seers' magic, which they would then use to create the larger stone afterwards. So we're going to fix that Shadowstone. Because the idea is we have too much magic in us, and maybe we can infuse that excess into the Shadowstone and cure ourselves. A pretty sound theory, I think. So the quest now asks you to go and collect bloodstone fragments. These are actually the same fragments that appeared on a previous current events patch before, which again, I've already covered. So if you've been keeping up to date with this, you, like me, might already be done with the quest. But I do like this. It adds a little bow on everything. It means that people who are doing this are now also interacting with the Consortium that had been monitoring bloodstone crazed creatures and so forth. It hooks it all up in a nice way. For what it's worth as well, by the way, at this point in the quest, you have an item in your inventory. Again, nice little bits of detail the devs are throwing in here that make it feel like a real little adventuring thing going on. It's called the Broken Shadowstone. It's described as this artifact has spots in it where bloodstone slivers could potentially fit. Guild Wars as a franchise, Guild Wars 2, sorry, has never really done quest items properly. They have a weird system in the story journal for personal story that has like quest items slot in there, but most people don't even know it exists and it's just weird. Well, I liked this. This had some cool flavor and had its own unique icon and so forth. So, after you've collected the slivers, things get even more interesting. The Broken Stone will be replaced with an Ascended quality item now. It's called the Reforged Shadowstone. And not only will you get this, but you'll also get a mail from the Consortium. So they say this, they say the Consortium has taken notice of your valiant effort to rebuild the Shadowstone. However, you are being led astray by misinformed Priory agents. The Priory is simply lacking the resources to fund its researchers and scholars. Please speak to our representative, Tradesman Mayers, before you hand over such a valuable artifact. So, Mayers. You'll recall at the start of the video, I talked about a Consortium NPC they added to the game selling snake oil. Well, that's the guy. So you're going to have to go and interact with this dude, who so far has seemed like a total liar. He said that he's selling something that cures people, but hasn't done anything. But hold on, what if they're telling the truth this time? Remember, put yourself in the shoes of the players who have been doing this a lot already. They've already spoken to Mayers, maybe a couple of weeks ago, real world time. They did this thing, they drank this oil and it didn't help them out, but now we're sick, we're ill, and it's like, oh god, that might actually cleanse us. What if he's telling the truth? So the good old-fashioned show me where button on the mail gives you directions to exactly where you need to go. Again, once you've started this quest, it's actually very easy to understand what you're doing. It's not difficult after that. It's just starting. It can be a bit annoying, make people miss it. But so we go to the Consortium guy in Lion's Arch, and he has some new dialogue for us. He immediately jumps into it. He says that the Consortium is aware of your condition, as well as this artifact that the Priory has been fumbling with for years. And we say, how? And he says that the Consortium is very well connected. He says, we have a proposal for you. Give us the Shadowstone, and in exchange, we will cure your hallucinations in a safe and natural way. And we say, well, why should I listen to you? And he says, just by knowing about your condition, we have proven that we have a more extensive network of information. The Priory, like the rest of the Pact, is falling apart. Let me show you how to complete it. There, see? We know what this artifact's for. I cannot disclose its purpose, but I can tell you it would be a terrible mistake for you to use this on yourself. And we ask him, well, how would you cure my condition? And he says, my crate oil has a certain ingredients that will suppress your hallucinations. Feel free to try it for yourself. And we say, well, what's in this stuff? And he says, I'm not at liberty to discuss that. I can assure you that all the ingredients are naturally sourced. When you are convinced, I will give you a concentrated formula that will permanently cure you. Oh god, okay. So this really does play with your head here, because you know he's been lying. You know that he's probably just a scummy guy trying to earn some money like most of the Consortium. But what if they're right? Okay, because he is kind of correct that they do seem to know a lot. He knew how to repair the Shadowstone. He knew that we were suffering from hallucinations. He knew the symptoms of our issue without us even telling them to him. And so there's the suggestion that they know all this because they're connected, right? That someone is teaching them. Who is this important character behind the scenes? That's something I think they're setting up there as well. There's also their suggestion in there that the Pact is falling apart, which make me very happy. Yes, please make it happen. And remember, okay, this is within the context of many of the other current events where, again, it's kind of Priory versus Consortium. And again, here, guys, we've got Priory versus Consortium. For what it's worth, I really enjoyed this bit of the quest as well, because I had one of those moments where multiple different stories and facets of the universe come together suddenly. Like, there were NPCs talking in the background about Evan Nashblade wiping out all the competition in Lion's Arch, and here I was dealing with something completely different with the Consortium. It was very, very cool. But okay, so you're almost done with the quest at this point. You return to Tranton, and you ask him, my god, dude, are you sure it is a good idea to use the Shadowstone on me? Because the Consortium just told me that's not true. Well, you don't mention the Consortium to him. He says, I can't say I'm certain if it will work, but I really do think this is our best shot. Did you find all of the slivers? And here you get a choice. Like an actual real choice, okay? So you can say, number one, I did. The Shadowstone's complete. And you can give the Priory the Shadowstone. Doing that, they'll then use it on you. They'll try to siphon the excess magic off. They'll see how the theory works. Apparently, and I don't have footage of this, you'll flash, you'll become an anomaly for a very brief period of time, and then you'll flash back, and you'll both be stood there confused, and you'll say, well, what did that do? And the Priory say, well, we're not really sure, I guess we'll see what happens. And the Priory quite nicely return the Shadowstone to you, so you get to keep that in your inventory. And the quest is over. Or you can go with the other option. You can say to him, no, I haven't finished rebuilding it yet. You can lie to him. You can say, I'll come back when I do. If you choose to lie, which I did, you can go all the way back to Lion's Arch. You can make a deal with the Consortium. The Consortium will say to you, I want to be clear, this is a permanent deal. Are you sure? And if you accept this, he'll give you an ascended, again, notice that these are ascended items here, an ascended highly concentrated crate oil bottle. I wonder whether that ascended item clarification is somehow a reference, maybe remember Randall's sort of ascension and things before? I'm curious if they're playing with some ideas there. But you'll get this potion, this consumable, you will drink it. It's kind of a less cool effect, you just get knocked over and poisoned, and then that's it. The Consortium take the Shadowstone. It's never returned to you. I don't have it on my account. Some other players who made other decisions have it on theirs. And the achievement, again, is done. Everyone's left to wonder, and we all are wondering this right now, who made the right choice? There seems to be no effect on anything right now, except one cool thing. Remember the background I gave you earlier? Remember I talked about an old Easter egg in Lion's Arch? Well, ArenaNet updated it apparently. Again, I haven't seen it and I can't show you because of Halloween, but apparently after you've done this quest, if you do the thing where you wade into the Mystic Forge again, you will now look ever so slightly different based on your choice. So if you did the Shadowstone thing, your anomaly will now look different to if you drank the snake oil with the Consortium. So this is really interesting. The fact is that this choice will matter. I don't like that we're getting content like this that, like, we're really never going to be able to replay in any capacity. And I don't like how forgettable this will be in the future, and I don't like how missable it is to many people. But presumably, this is actually going to affect future living world. Is this how ArenaNet are going to be implementing a little bit of branching storylines and player choice? Because it's easier and cheaper to do it in this format than the big showy main releases? Either way, I'm really, really excited to see what they do in the future. I love the lore that they interacted here. I thought this was fantastic. Very short, but the implications of this quest line and the quality of what they put in on this really is far beyond much of what ArenaNet have done before. When this came out and I'd finished it, I showed my utter love for it on Twitter, and maybe some of you questioned why I cared so much, but hopefully this video has demonstrated that a little bit more. And I have to say, one of the coolest things about this is seeing the players take sides. ArenaNet have been so scared to do some kind of faction system where people are crossing swords a little, the Kurziks versus the Luxons, the Alliance versus the Horde, the whatever. Guild Wars has missed that for so long, but now we have that playful banter there. Go to the comments and thumb up either Consortium or Priory. I want to see who's got more and justify why you picked what you picked. Are you with me, guys? You gonna give the Consortium a shot, or are you those silly do-gooders over at the Priory? I don't know whether there are great hidden lines based on your race or your profession. Sometimes you see that in Guild Wars. I'm not sure how much we can expect from the current events team. But that's about it, guys. I'm very interested in the connection here with the gods. What did happen to Randall in Path 4? What makes it even more interesting is that he appears kind of see-through and spectral moments before he disappears? Is that somehow similar to us becoming anomalies? He even mentions Lord Odrin at one point, who's one of the coolest, most established lore characters and a personal favourite of mine. What could be happening here? I think I want comments on this video more than any other I've done this week, or even in the most recent 2 weeks. I really want to hear what you guys have to say. Give me your theories. If you haven't done it yet, go play the quest. Seriously, come back and let's talk. Thanks guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'll be back with more current event stuff very soon. Let's see what you have to say. Have a great evening, and I'll see you next time.
Perhaps the bloodstone
Rage
still
at
connected
maximum.
to the 6 gods.
Let it!
Wait, but hold on. About 2 episodes, we're going to be looking at the quests that were added to the Halloween event in 2010. So the last couple of episodes were 2009. Now we're looking at what was added last year, which is in fact the stuff that was added to the game. It was the last new content I'd played just before I started the Let's Play in the very first place. In fact, you remember me actually saying a couple of episodes ago that honestly, when I started this Let's Play, you can see me getting like Halloween drops from creatures in pre-searing, and basically I started the Let's Play I think the day after I'd played these quests. It's just kind of cool to think of that. So to start them, we're going to speak to this person here, the Countess of Hakewood. Okay, one thing I do want us to bear in mind is obviously we saw the 2009 quests last episode. These 2010 quests, these were added after the first chapter of Guild Wars Beyond, the War in Kryta. So there's going to be a tiny little bit of dialogue here that assumes that all the stuff that happens in War